Alrighty. Welcome everybody. We'll just give it a few minutes as the attendees roll in. I see the numbers coming in here. We're joined by Nicholas, Ben and Sumitra. Very excited to have the team with us. How are we this morning?
Great, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. We're in the New Zealand, Wellington HQ. And where are you guys from? So there's a chat function. Let us know where you're calling in from, and also let us know that you can hear us loud and clear. We'll just make sure all those things are sorted before we get started. Yes, can hear you. Thank you, Khalid. Welly. Audio fine, excellent. Where are you guys calling in from? We'd love to learn more about you. Philadelphia, excellent. We're going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of this. So there's also a Q&A button at the bottom of this Zoom. Please feel free, as we discuss various topics, to add any comments or questions, and we'll be happy to discuss those at the end. We'll make sure to leave some time for the discussion. We've got Victor from Chicago, Gary from Wellington, Gustavo from Los Angeles. Excellent.
Oh, we've got a local here too.
We do.
Nice.
Gary. So you guys looking forward to having this discussion?
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's pretty cool to have the team together and you know, learn a little bit more about how you guys dive into performance bottlenecks and solve them. I'm just a marketer, so I'm here to learn as well. Alrighty, so I think we can get started now. Excellent. So my name is Andre from Raygun, obviously, and I'm really excited to bring in the team and help facilitate this discussion today. I'll be handing it over to Nicholas, Ben and Sumitra shortly to discuss how to easily identify and resolve front-end performance bottlenecks. And jump to the next slide. And so our agenda for today is we'll do some quick introductions. I'll let the team introduce themselves. Then we'll dive into some, you know, why there's been a move to user-centric metrics. And then we'll briefly go over our process for identifying, diagnosing, prioritizing, and measuring performance work on the performance of your website or application. This is kind of to give you an idea of, you know, the areas that we look at and the process that we follow to give context to the examples that then we'll dive into. So we've got a bunch of examples and things that you guys can take away and implement as soon as you can. So that's going to be the focus. We're going to run through the overview and then dive into some examples, and then we'll leave some time for the Q&A at the end. So just another reminder, there's a Q&A section in Zoom. Please feel free to add questions as we have this discussion, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. Just flick on to the next one. Firstly though, I'd love to just run a quick poll, and let me launch that now. And basically this is to give us a little bit of feedback and idea around who's out there. We've got a bunch of attendees in live right now. It's always nice to kind of understand a little bit where you're coming from, some of the challenges you have, so maybe we can adapt the content to match your needs. So let me launch that now. Are you seeing that? Excellent. So how big is your development team at your organization? It'd be interesting to know that. How much time does your team spend working on performance issues enhancements? I know it's hard to put a percentage on this, but just give us a roundabout idea of the focus amount of time that you spend on this. And then what is your biggest pain points in your performance workflow? So we've got monitoring, identifying, diagnosing, prioritizing, or measuring the impact. So we'll just give that a few more seconds. I should be able to share the results so you can see it as well. All right. So we've got a lot of people with 6 to 20 in their team, and then quite a few with 50 plus actually. So that's interesting. 10% or under 10% is over 56% of people are spending under 10% on performance issues enhancements. 60%, all right, and identifying and diagnosing issues. Me and Ben had a bit of a bet on this one, and it's looking like I'm coming ahead on this. All right, I think that's, how do you feel about that? There's 18% for prioritizing work and 47% identifying and diagnosing issues. I'll hopefully be able to share that now.
There
You guys see that? Any initial thoughts on that team?
I'm surprised with I'm surprised you won that bet, to be quite honest. So yeah, I know prioritizing what to work on is always a challenge. So yeah, it's interesting that's come through, but great to have this information.
And may I ask, how much of your time is spent on performance issues and enhancements? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, on the spot. I'd say probably around, for me personally, would be in between 10 and 25% of the time, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree as well. And then I just try to put in some performance enhancements here and there with my regular work as well. So just trying to get up a little bit.
We all want to build great new features, right?
Right.
But we have to carve out that time. All right, so let's move on and jump to the next poll, and then I think I can hand it over to our esteemed panel. Take it away, Ben.
Perfect. So it's great to meet you all. I'm Ben. I'm one of the team leads here at Raygun, front-end developer, and keen to talk about performance issues with you all.
Hello, I'm Sumitra. I am a public site engineer at Raygun. Yeah, really excited to be talking about these performance enhancements and issues that we're going to cover.
Cool, and I'm Nicholas. I'm a product manager here at Raygun, and I'm specifically working in the for our real user monitoring, which is our front-end performance monitoring product. So hence jumping in and chatting a little bit about things from that product angle. So with that in mind, I just wanted to kind of frame up today's discussion with it just as sort of a general discussion around user-centric performance metrics, which is something we've been thinking a lot about. So obviously, given you're all here today, I think it goes without saying that, we all know users are demanding sort of faster performing software than ever before. And their actions are really telling us that, even if they don't know it themselves. The sort of going rate in the industry is that 40% of your users will leave your site if it takes longer than 4 seconds to load. And so, some of those metrics like that are pretty sobering in terms of painting a pretty realistic picture of the impact that performance can have on both user experience and business outcomes. But we know, and I'm sure a lot of you folks as engineers and people working in this space, it's not always easy to understand how your software is performing first and foremost, but also understand how it's performing in the eyes of the user. And with sort of general trends in the industry, we're seeing more and more of the sort of software load happening on the client side. And so what we're seeing is that load time is not really painting the full picture anymore. It's still a valuable metric, but it's not necessarily always indicative of that user experience piece. You might have particular XHR calls or assets loading on a page that aren't actually in view or recognizable to the user, but they're contributing to that overall load time. And so you're not really getting an accurate picture of how the software is being perceived by your users. And so I guess that sort of sets the tone for what this whole user-centric performance metrics discussion is about and sort of the new standard. So what is FirstPaint, FirstContempoPaint? These are a couple of metrics that we've just recently introduced into the product. FirstPaint is the first time that anything visually different is rendered to the screen, and then FirstContempoPaint is the first time that anything from the DOM is rendered, so your images or your text, something like that. And what these metrics really do is they provide a better understanding of how the user perceived your site to be loading. They're kind of markers of key visual stages from the user's perspective in terms of that loading journey. So, going back to what we talked about before, if you've got an image that's loading out of view down the page, or XHR calls that are running that the user might not be sort of necessarily aware of, then they're not going to be counted into that FirstPaint, FirstContempoPaint, but they're going to be counted into that fully loaded metric. So effectively what these metrics provide you is a different avenue for diagnosing performance problems, because you can see if those values are slow and the user's perceiving your site to be loading slow. But it also provides, therefore, another avenue for resolving and improving performance, because you can actually start to look at how can we improve performance in the eyes of our customers. And This is something that obviously we're very lucky, Ben and Sumitra, to have two very capable developers here talking to you today and providing some really tangible examples about ways that you can improve some of those numbers. So I guess the final point from me, and Ben will riff on this a little bit more, but you know, I think what's been really interesting here is as we've started to bring these kind of user-centric performance metrics into our own engineering workflows, it's driven a really interesting discussion around, you know, what does loaded mean, and how has that evolved from being loaded in the eyes of the page or the browser to now starting to talk about loaded in the eyes of the user.
Yeah, so definitely like loading in the eyes of a developer. When you start seeing that load time metric, typically that can have a lot of different XHRs and scripts contributing to it, which aren't necessarily positive to a user experience. For example, I know Andre, being a marketer, loves a lot of marketing scripts included to better track the conversion rates and people viewing the page. Generally, those are loaded asynchronously, and so they don't contribute to a FirstPaint, but they'll contribute to the load time. And so the user typically won't perceive any regression or anything bad to it, but it would add to the load time. And so when you're trying to identify some performance problems, you need to keep in mind how your site functions and what different scripts you have. We're going through this section now. We're going to be looking into a bit of how we identify performance problems, how we diagnose them, and then how we measure the impact that of our improvements as we go along. So the way we can identify performance problems when we're actually working on our own application is first of all monitoring it. So this is looking at trends, any spikes, any deployments we've had, any events or changes. This is typically to understand our system. We're looking at the trends to make sure that any updates or changes that you're making to your application over time are positive. We all like to build applications, and we're all part of an application team which is constantly iterating. We're constantly adding new features, like we added these new metrics a couple of weeks ago. But as we add and build new code, it's of course contributing to more that we send to the user. And so we've got to keep monitoring that over time to ensure that we're not degrading their experiences. Integrating with deployment tracking, if you can, is also great in case someone accidentally includes a whole bunch of testing scripts or any additional code that is only meant to be in your development environment into production. You should be able to quickly see that your load time is then jumping right up, as you can kind of see in a graph here that we have on the slide. And then just making sure that any spikes or changes could be due to a bad release. It could be a particular bad customer came on board. Is tracked. And then always get curious and be curious on what your application is loading and what it does. There's been numerous times in the past which we've been having a look and we've been investigating performance issues that we've come across the show. And then one of the sort of mantras I suppose we like to have around it, Raygun, is get curious about what you're doing or what your performance issues are. So if you start to see something spike, something get terrible, jump in and start having a look as to why that is a problem. Maybe you've just had a new customer on board or a new developer, depending on what your software is like, and they're just having a terrible experience because their mobile connection is horrid, or because they've naturally had a bad time. Maybe your server's just timing out. Just get curious and try and better understand and diagnose. And then diagnosing the issue. So once you start to better identify that an issue is appearing, then the next stage we do is try and identify the root cause of what's going wrong or where we can make improvements. And this is where we start jumping into more of the details. In Raygun real user monitoring, you can jump into a given page to see a histogram of the page performance and the distribution and spread of that. So it gives you a good indication of your medians, how many people are actually experiencing your P50. And then you can start to see more of the outliers of your P99s, your P90s, the 10th percentile of 10% of users are having this terrible, poor experience. You can then get a better understanding of individual users as you can jump into the sessions page, and you can start to drill into their performance issues too. And then once you're drilling into a page, you can look at a waterfall chart to understand where your given assets are loading, how much time they're spent in reference to when the page actually loads and at what point it is available to the user. And then once you start to understand what normal is for your system, you can then start to prioritize some ideas or fixes to better deliver them to your customers. So not all issues are the same, and not all issues take the same amount of time to implement. For example, coming up, we have a few different ideas of how you can improve the performance for your system, such as like minifying. It's quite an easy one to do versus code splitting your application. That's a bit harder. So you need to prioritize what particular issues are available, what fixes you can implement, and so you can then deliver value to your customers at a quicker rate.
Is that something that have a discussion with the team around where you spend your time?
Yeah. As we jump into more of the examples, we can jump into like the value of them.
Yeah.
I think that's just riffing on your point, Andre. I think that's really where that relationship between product and engineering comes in. I think, we've set it out as an intention. We know the link between performance and customer experience. So product's inherently focused on that performance work, and that can become part of those prioritization discussions when we're scoping out a piece of work, or when we're developing the roadmap. We can get that feedback from the team, understand where there's some of those opportunities to have the most impact, and then bring that into the workflow. So it's about having those discussions, and then also having the data and the insights to be able to back up some of those prioritization discussions.
Totally. I think that's what was really really interesting around some of the events we were running with those panels is connecting with the work you guys do on the code to the actual impact of the customer. And when you can see 50 or 100 or 1,000 people visiting that page who are getting affected by laggy performance, that certainly gives you numbers to work with around impacting the actual user experience, right? For sure.
Yeah, definitely. And along with identifying, diagnosing, and deploying any changes, some people think that's the end of the piece of task that you're working on. Like, you don't have to worry about it after it's in production. But I feel like here at Raygun, what we do is actually we measure the impact after we've deployed our work as well, because that's important to know that you're actually benefiting your users both immediately and in the long run as well, not just temporarily and making things worse over time. And usually how we measure the performance impact is just tracking the performance changes. And what helps me when I ship out new pieces of work is that I can track my deployments and how it has affected users by using our deployments feature and checking our performance trends. And by using these, I can tell that the performance is either improved or decreased, and why there was a sudden change, or why that spike happened and why that decrease happened. And I just don't have to figure out what time I deployed a certain piece of work at a certain time in a separate site, and then try and line up the details of where that spike happened. And just overall, a performance line chart that we currently have in place is what makes it really good for us as developers. It makes our time more efficient, and it helps us move forward with what developers should be focusing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's working on our own or helping out others. And even looking into the page performance distribution chart itself and real user monitoring, I feel like I've got the findings there to track what the load times are themselves and measure the average load time, the medium load time as well. And how this is useful is combining these two features of the metrics and the deployments feature just means it's more valuable information that I'm getting back at a certain point in time where it's gone downhill and uphill. And just seeing the majority of users and how they're experiencing the page itself is something significant that I feel like is what you need to see after you've deployed out your site. And so seeing the histogram visualizations and the distribution of the page views is very significant with how the different buckets of within your page performance is like. And of course, just being able to see the amount of users affected within these performance metrics show me what areas I need to focus on. So if a certain amount of users are hitting the 5-second mark of their load time compared to like about 2,000 people hitting the 1-second mark, I can see that there is quite a bit of significant amount of people hitting that 4-second mark when they shouldn't be. And that's just very good to know and why. And just being sure that my work for a specific page is actually making a difference is what I really like to see when I've deployed out my work, and just seeing those before and after metrics come in place as well. It's just really nice to be able to have a waterfall chart and being able to see like how the assets have loaded and what the amount of time was with the assets. And a big win for me with this waterfall chart as well is that I can use the time range feature and measure how long the assets have taken and loaded in a previous point in time compared to the current point in time. And so I can actually see, going back, what impact I've made for the customers. And it's just kind of going back to the whole measuring or tracking your performance changes. Like, how do I know if I've shipped my work with confidence if I don't have these metrics to help me out after I've deployed out certain pieces of work? And if I notice that a current release has actually decreased in performance as well, I can actually compare these two deployments with my previous deployment compared to my current deployment, and kind of see where this is located, so I don't have to like dig around and such. I can kind of use this really nice like feature for comparing the variables, so I know that it's within a current release compared to, okay, like it's not really all the way down the road over there. It's kind of located in this current piece of work that I deployed out recently. And what comes with that as well is being able to compare the browser types as well, which is so nice. I mean, being able to compare Chrome and a browser that everybody loves, IE11. But at Raygun, we do care about IE11. Internet Explorer 11 is something that people still use nowadays at Raygun for the Raygun site, and users actually view it on that browser. So it's very important to be able to see what the load times were and how a user's experience was actually impacted. And it also, what comes hand in hand with these two variables is also, you can also compare geography for cities and countries as well. Like, for example, if you wanted to compare the USA to the United Kingdom, you can definitely do that, and being able to see how hosting your service in a different country impacts another country as well. And also just, it lines up well if we have like a bigger customer base, say in like USA, which is what Raygun has currently. So we know we can target our audience and our website into USA, because that's where our users are mostly located. So we know where the load times need to be at least improved greatly.
Wonderful. No, that's super interesting. So yeah, keep the questions coming, folks. We'll get to those after these examples, but we'll go one for one between Ben and Sumitra and dive in. And I think the order you've done these is with some low-hanging fruit to get started.
Yep.
And then gets tougher as we go through. So let's jump into it.
Perfect. So like what Andre said, we'll go through some examples now of some different issues that you can fix based on what we've experienced in the past. Minification is something that I've experienced in every project. I think as you start to develop a site, it's very easy just to start developing it, but being able to minify your code is one of the easiest things and easiest wins you can get. Minification is, for a lot of you, maybe non-developers out there, it's the process of actually making the code less human readable. You're just removing all those white spaces, comments, and unneeded information around it. Now, the reason why this is important is because computers don't need all of that information in order to understand what you're actually typing or developing. And so you can automate this using a minifying tool integrated into part of your process and integrated into your deployment, whether you use Octopus or you use another CI/CD tool. It's very easy to implement. So if we're starting to talk about the time versus value or cost of implementing it, because developers' time is money essentially that you're spending, it's very straightforward. And then once you implement some minification process, you should start to see those load times for each asset being reduced. Each asset being mostly JavaScript, CSS, and you can even minify your HTML, get that all automated so that computers can more easily read that and pass it.
There's that bonus tip around debugging as well. Is that this one?
Yes. And if you're worried about debugging it because it looks kind of atrocious and a little hard to read, props to anyone who can. You can always upload source maps. These tools allow you to create source maps, which essentially map a minified file to a regular, more developer file. Provides that key so that you can more easily identify any errors, map them back to what you actually write, and then debug it. And you can upload those to Raygun as well, so that your stack traces are automatically passed.
Oh, and keeping on the same topic of shipping as little as possible, I feel like images are one of the assets that definitely need to be optimized. So usually when I work on the public site and I deploy out a new design page, such as our recent homepage, the load times increase significantly because there's just a lot more assets that we've introduced into that specific page compared to what it was like previously. And I can find this out by actually drilling into the Waterfall and run as well, and also just looking into that particular page and seeing what assets are taking the longest to load. And usually how I tackle this situation is that I just optimize my images, I optimize my PNGs and the SVGs that are included in the public site. And the tools that I use is one is called SVG OMG and compress.png.com, and they're just awesome for making your assets just so much smaller and getting rid of those unnecessary details, especially in SVGs. Like, you may not want that description tag within that SVG, so you can actually take it out using that specific tool there. And using sources attributes as well is a great implementation that I use in the public site. So the only image that I'm serving to a user is actually the correct size that they are needing. So there's actually no point in serving them a large retina-friendly image if they don't have a retina screen or a large screen size. So a better way of actually serving our customers the fastest load time is actually to give them a smaller image, and that's what the source set attribute does. And just in general, image optimization is just definitely key and makes a huge impact on how positively the performance metrics go up.
Yeah, and it's funny on the image optimization. I think when I first joined, it's easy to see some SVGs which aren't optimized. You kind of jump in and you start having a look. You might open up an SVG file, and the moment you start seeing some of those extra white space, you're just like, this could just be optimized, and you can save a lot of kilobytes.
I think the worst thing is when you're like browsing on an e-commerce store and open up a product you're really interested in and you see that the image bounce down, it loads the first bit and then it bounces down a little bit more and it bounces down a bit more and bounces. It's like suspenseful, but after a while you're just like, I just want to leave.
Yeah, I can just give up after a while. So the next example is reducing the number of requests. So this is something, again, that was tied into that SVG work I was just talking about a moment ago. One of the classic cases that you can improve the performance of your site is to not have as many images being loaded. Now, when I first started, I believe it was at Raygun actually, started having a look at the public site and seeing why a lot of those our load times were being a lot larger than what they should have been. What I noticed is that we were loading like 60 odd images on a given page. You can see that by looking at a waterfall tab in RUM or by opening your Chrome DevTools as well, and you kind of just profile. And I started noticing these like images just flashing in when I loaded. I ended up doing is reducing them from 60 odd images to like about 10 to 15. And this is using techniques such as creating a sprite sheet for those images. A sprite sheet is more of an old school term, but that's when you start merging the images into one and then only showing the particular given area. Now, for this particular piece of work, they're mostly SVGs though, but you can still use a similar concept, but make SVG symbols for those icons. So I believe on these given pages, we linked to a lot of different external icons for representing what a pen looks like, or representing maybe a cursor, just those neat little icons you see on a public site, or even in an application that kind of designers love to include because it makes it just a little bit more polish. But we then ended up combining them into a single SVG symbol that we then include and load, so that whenever they are being served an icon from a given set, it is just loading one symbol instead of multiple. There's a few caveats you have to do around there. It doesn't make sense to make everything or merging everything into one image. You got to use sort of a little bit of, I don't want to say common knowledge, but a little bit of like thought behind it. What makes sense to be combined into one? Icons all related to an icon set would make sense to merge into a single asset, but if there's an unrelated giant image, then you're probably better off using that source attribute that Symmetra's talked about.
But that within itself is actually really good for image optimization as well, because you're actually increasing decreasing the amount of requests that you're making with sprite sheeting. So that's really good. Yeah,
which then reduces the number of overhead and requesting them. So it's a lot less HTTP headers that need to be passed along.
Right. And yeah, so even in the Raygun app itself, we do have a lot of scripts that we execute. And this becomes a major overhead as well, and impacts the performance quite severely, because we have all these separate scripts that we want to load in. But in the Raygun app, we actually preload our most important scripts, and just being able to do that means that script is in the memory, it's ready to use for our most important sections, such as the first view that a user sees, like the hero section. And usually these scripts are rendered blocking by default, which Ben will talk about a lot more in detail, but I wanted to cover that is why the load time has never been impacted, because it's just render blocking, and it just, when loading these assets in without the preload value, it just really affects the performance itself. And this kind of comes hand in hand with splitting out your CSS and JavaScript as well. So you're only preloading in the assets that you are required on first view of the user's screen. And the prefetch value is also a great value as well to add in for loading in scripts in advance, but it's kind of like lower priority, but kind of near the scripts that you are wanting after, such as like your hero section. It's just a great way for especially single applications. And those are just like having the another page ready, and just making sure that that script, like I need that script ready, but just not yet. So it's really nice to have that prefetch value within it there as well.
Yeah, and you can also use a Preconnect tag, which is very similar to the preload or prefetch Symmetra was just talking about. It's good for if you're communicating to another API, which is required, and it just hints to the browser that you should already establish those headers. You should already make a connection so that when it comes to making the request, it only needs to do what is required. It doesn't need to do sort of the everyday craft, so to speak. And so another example that we've also looked into, and I've looked into in the past, is just limiting the number of blocking requests. So to explain what a blocking request is for a second, a blocking request is an asset that the browser needs in order to render for the very first time. So it stops what's called the critical rendering path. Critical rendering path being what the browser needs in order to render that first paint. So it will need everything in the DOM, it'll need the CSS object model, and it'll need any blocking JavaScript assets as well. So if you can limit the amount of blocking requests that your website has, reducing the number of scripts, reducing the number of CSS files, then you can increase the time that the browser can actually paint anything on the screen. Because I don't know if how many of you know, I know I've talked to Symmetra about this a little bit before, but all JavaScript and CSS assets by default are render blocking. CSS assets make sense. The browser can't render anything. It can't make it look pretty until it knows how to make it look pretty. And so that's why CSS assets kind of, the browser just has to wait until they're downloaded before it can render anything. JavaScript assets, it's kind of more of a the past. JavaScript by default will or can modify that document object model, and so the browser needs to wait before it can even render for the first time if you include any script tags, regardless of them being at the top or at the bottom. So they've spotted this in the past in our application and even on our marketing websites. And the way you can start to hint to the browser saying, I'm not going to modify this document before you render it for the first time, so continue going ahead and render, is by marking your JavaScript assets as deferred or asynchronous. There's a slight difference between the two. Asynchronous is best used when it doesn't depend on any external script. This is what we use in a Raygun for JS snippet and marketing scripts generally. Just saying, hey, there's no external dependencies. All of my dependencies are included in this file. Just include it, pass it whenever you have the moment, whenever you're free, essentially. Deferred means a slightly different thing, which is pass the document right at the end after you've actually constructed the document object model. And for CSS files, if you want to limit the amount of blocking requests as well, you can make use of media queries. So when you're linking them in, just give them a media attribute. In the past, I've always been told when I was first learning to program, keep your print style sheet separate to your main one. So if anyone tries to print out a web page, it's kind of self-contained, but you could take that a step further as well and actually keep your mobile styles separate to your desktop styles, so that they only need them when it actually comes to using them.
Cool. And nowadays as well, the design team are wanting a little extra bling on their product pages that they prototype, and usually this comes with a price in terms of how it impacts FirstPaint and FirstContempoPaint, such as adding animations through JavaScript. And currently on the crash reporting product page that we have, there's an animation further down the page. It's not in the user's view on first load. And this is kind of pointless having the animation trigger when the page is first loaded, because the user hasn't even seen it in their view just yet, because they are still in the hero section. And yeah, I mean, you could add a delay to kind of assume what time the user will scroll down to that section, but just at that point, you're kind of just making a user assumption, and who knows how long they'll take to scroll down to that certain section. They could scroll really fast if they actually miss it as well, and it's just causing unnecessary load times as well on the assets. So a good logical way that I tackle this performance overhead and user assumption is by implementing the intersection observer API. And briefly how this works is when this certain piece of function is not actually triggered until the user scrolls to it and it's in their view. So that function's just sitting there waiting for the user, and then once they have it within the view of their screen, then the animation will trigger. And a bonus tip as well for the intersection observer API is to actually disconnect it as well, because if you don't disconnect it, then there'll definitely be memory leaks, because you're just constantly triggering it unnecessarily, and that's just not something that you would want as well, because that will definitely impact the performance times. And lazy loading images as well. I really love this feature, which Google Chrome recently released, and it just positively impacts the performance as well, where the images aren't sent a network call until the user is scrolling near the image. So that means only a certain amount of images will load. And for example, a user may not scroll down all the way to our product pages, so what's the point in actually serving them an image that they're not even going to see? And that's just really nice to be able to, especially this intersection observer API, it's just really nice to be able to have these kind of functions, because not only does it impact our performance greatly, but it just takes out all those user assumptions as well. And yeah, I think that's a wrap from us for the examples now.
Look over to the next. My let's grab this. Wonderful, thank you very much. Jump into this. So the first question from Eric Law is, our crash reporting is in Raygun, but other telemetry is elsewhere, mostly Datadog. Any way to get filtered crash reporting errors as a metric into Datadog? Any APIs to extract the data? Also similar question for real user monitoring.
Yeah, not currently, but yeah, we recognize that sort of extensibility is something that we really want to focus on. So I guess we'll just hint that, you know, we hear you, and yeah, stuff is in the works.
Great. Similar question. Sorry, it looks like you have P99 off by default in your screenshots. Is there a way for us to do that as well, instead of having to manually toggle off each time when using the RUM dashboards?
That's a great piece of feedback. I'm sure Ben could speak to eChart's functionality there, but yeah, I'm sure we can.
I believe if you go to your RUM settings, you can turn on the hide 10% slowest, which will then default for all the charts.
Oh, true.
So that should then hide your P99s. So if you go to your real user monitoring, go to the settings tab and just enable the hide 10% slowest by default.
Cool. And sorry about the view, everyone. My computer was having, I can't scroll down through the questions. I'm just a marketer. I can't figure this thing out, but yeah, it's so I've had to steal this computer. So sorry for the screen. Can you compare? This is a good one for you, Symmetra. Can you compare two deployments in the RUM compare tab, or do you need to use custom tags?
You can use custom tags if you like, but you basically define the release number that you're comparing to and another release number, so it doesn't have to be like the latest one compared to the previous one. You can go all the way back in time to a release that you've done quite a while back, and then compare it to another release that was also a previous deployment as well. So you're not really restricted as much with how you compare your certain deployment tags.
You will need to use custom tags, I believe, to attach, as it directed, to attach that session information, so that, that Raygun knows which version of your site that user is browsing with, and then we can effectively aggregate kind of all the performance data that associates with that tag. But yeah, building in sort of head-to-head comparison of deployments is something we're looking at.
Krishna is on our team is really passionate about.
Yeah, it's something we've as we're obviously a big believer in dog fooding our products here, and so we're using Realm all the time, and that's something that the custom tags is a good starting point for, but we definitely want to build more exhaustive stuff there.
Because I love that feature, because you compare two different deployments. You've done an update and it tells you exactly how, like, the percentage of improvement in the performance, ideally. And is that through custom tagging? I thought is it connected to Octopus Deploy? Is that how it works, and tracks that deployment number, or is that?
Not quite. Currently the implementation would be with custom tagging and just sort of attaching, that like semantic versioning number or whatever versioning number with just sort of attaching that tag, and that can all be instrumented for the code snippet. There's plenty of documentation sort of outlining how you can go about doing that. That just effectively tags those user sessions that are coming through with that bit of metadata, which can then be used not only to compare deployments, but also to filter right throughout real user monitoring that performance data down to a specific version or a series of versions.
Yeah, the custom tags is cool because it is all custom. If it doesn't have to just be deployments, you could tag like VIP customers or users, and then you can see what VIP customers experience versus maybe non, or if there's some other telemetry.
So Gary, can we get a copy of the presentation slides for sure? We'll send out a full recording of this webinar along with a link to the slides. So we'll send that through for sure, Gary. And then from Jeffrey, is number of requests still an issue with HTTP/2? My understanding was multiple smaller images was better than one huge image.
With HTTP2, it's not as much of an issue. Definitely, like a lot of small assets are a bit better than bigger ones once you are moving along to that sort of infrastructure. But it's a general philosophy. If you're serving less, then it's less than. If you're serving less, then that's less that the client has to actually download and have in memory.
Cool. Well, that's all. Oh, hold on, there's some more questions coming through. Then please keep the questions going. We've got another 10 minutes, but we're happy to wrap this up early if we can. So from Alik, what should be the approach if we have a minimum of 100 images to be loaded on the page? With lazy loading already implemented, page takes huge time to load. Images are getting loaded from CDN. Is it good?
A minimum of 100?
Minimum of 100 images to be loaded on the page. Already implementing lazy loading, and it takes a long time, and it's getting loaded from your CDN.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a rough case for you, Leak. If you've kind of done a lot, then that's when you could look into doing HTTP2 to make sure that their loading is quick as they can in parallel. You could look at combining them, but it really depends on what your use case is. Sometimes there's no way to avoid loading hundreds or so images in, because it is one of those trade-offs between the experience you're giving to a user versus what their experience would be like if those images didn't exist. Sometimes you just got to accept that. That said, that's when you start to look into those user centric metrics like FirstPaint. Images typically only impact the total load time. They won't impact your FirstPaint calls. And so the user should still be able to see that the page is rendered and there are placeholders there for where the images will load or will be, as long as you're applying those width and height attributes onto the images.
Yeah, I think Ben touches on a really good point here. Often a conversation that we have between product and engineering is, Raygun deals with really big data sets. And so rendering sort of visualizations of those data sets sometimes does take, a noticeable amount of time on the user's end. And so what we try to do in those situations where we can't actually render, that big data set a lot faster is we try to look at, what's that loading journey, if you will, visually up to the point where that data set is rendered, so that you know, the user might be seeing a spinner as that as you know, a particular graph comes in or something like that, but because the rest of the page is rendered and you know, interactive and everything like that, then the user's perception of it is still really valuable. So I think you can start to look at the way in which you're loading things and visually the different stages, so that even if maybe those images are taking a little bit longer, the user's still having a good experience with it, which, as Ben said, you know, metrics like FirstPaint and FirstContempoPaint are really crucial in understanding that.
You mentioned earlier, like 4 seconds is a bit of a kind of a number that, you know, gets thrown around a bit. 40% of users abandon the page after 4 seconds. But would it be fair to say that's not like universal across people's apps, websites? It kind of depends, right?
Yeah, I think it really depends, you know, what you're kind of looking into. I think if you know, to take the example I used earlier, if you're an e-commerce site, right, and you click on a product page, that product page might have 3 or 4 images, you know, probably one of which is going to be displayed in full size at the start. So I think the expectation in the user mind there is, you know, that things have got to be really quick. And obviously, you know, again, to use that e-commerce example, there's loads and loads of competitors in that space. So there's plenty of other places that users can go if their experience with your site is not at a standard that they think. But you know, if people are interacting with applications where they know they're loading in large data sets, or that maybe they know they're loading in a large number of images, I definitely think that users have a little bit more leniency and sort of understanding in that situation. So yeah, that metric is not a sort of hard and fast universal metric, but I think it does just provide that interesting sort of indication as to how much this matters for folks.
And as we're monitoring over time, gives you kind of what your benchmark is, right?
Totally.
You know, and obviously you want to improve on that.
Yeah.
All right, on the compare tab in RUM, it looks like load time can be compared across versions, but not FirstContempoPaint timings. Is there a way to do that? Again,
these are yeah, I mean, our goal with any of these things, it's fantastic to hear this feedback, to be honest, because you know, our goal with these things is to get new features and functionality in front of customers as soon as possible, and then let you guys sort of define where we go to next with adding that in. So, you know, rather than sort of sit internally for an extra 2 months and sort of sow these features right throughout the application, we'd rather you know, get them in front of you as soon as possible, and then hear kind of fantastic feedback like that, where we go, okay, well, you know, actually adding it to the compare tab is going to be the next cab off the rank in terms of making FirstPaint, FirstContempoPaint more exhaustive throughout the application. So yeah, all I can say is appreciate the feedback, and it's noted down.
Feature request added, Dustin. Nice work. Sean asks, what are you using to measure FirstPaint, FirstContempoPaint load time in older browsers that don't support paint timings via the Performance API?
Well, currently, if the browser doesn't support FirstPaint, FirstContempoPaint via the Performance API, in our snippet, we don't track it. The one exception here is Internet Explorer, which actually has the concept of an IE FirstPaint, which we do track. The reason behind is we want to try and compare apples to apples. If we start like having a custom FirstPaint metric or a FirstContempoPaint based on some other telemetries we gather, maybe we wait for a image to load or something else, then it's not quite accurate. And so we're trying to balance the accuracy versus having just a metric there for the sake of having a metric.
Excellent. Well, that is, you know, there's plenty of questions. Any final comments today? We can kind of get into wrapping this up.
No, just yeah, thanks everyone for joining and coming along, and yeah, hopefully there's some value in that, and obviously there's contact details around, plenty of ways you can get in touch with us. So if you have any further questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, we really appreciate the feedback as well that you guys give back to us, and hopefully these examples and these lovely features that we've presented to you guys today are really, Nicholas said, valuable to you guys. Yeah, and if you guys are wanting to look more into this as well, and Andre will explain a bit more later in about real user monitoring, I think it's just a really great tool, and being able to share it with you guys is just really amazing that we can pass on information and just knowledge about how we detect and diagnose and resolve and continue to monitor issues as well. So, yeah.
And just an echo of what the other two have said, really. It's been great.
Well, it's been wonderful having all three of you here, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And obviously you guys might have your own secret source of performance tips. So please, if you want to email them through to us, that'd be great. We can kind of maybe add them as notes and kind of help each other, create great experiences for our customers. We will email you out the full recording. We'll attach the slides. And if anyone would like to try real user monitoring, obviously some of you will already be customers, but if some of you folks haven't tried it yet and would like to check it out, feel free to hit reply on the email coming up, or get at me at andre@raygun.com, and I'm sure we can arrange that, or go to raygun.com and start a trial yourself. And thanks so much for signing up. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to the panel, and we'll sign out. So see you later. And here's where